Yeah, I want to keep this somewhat basic, right? Like I've seen some Proxmox tutorials out there and they're awesome, but they all kind of like go down the rabbit hole very quickly. And I can see where that might be kind of a little bit put off for folks like, wow, this will be a real challenge to get going. And I want to make sure that this doesn't come across this way because, wow, this is an awesome tool. Um, so there's so many things I love about this. One is this is basically a private cloud on your own environment. Now, Proxmox is designed for enterprise. There's a lot of high-end features that I'll briefly mention there. I'm not going to cover them. I want to focus on the home lab stuff because my idea is get used to this. And if you decide, hey, this is really cool, can we adopt this into our corporate environment? Yes, you can. So I'm trying to give a little love to the Proxmox folks because I think they've made a really good product here and it's open source. Anybody can go through and run this. So this is free to go use on your home network. It does cost a little bit money if you want the enterprise patching. I don't so much need the enterprise patching, but quite honestly, I paid for it anyway, just because I felt like the software was that good. If I can give them money so they keep doing this, yeah, it's kind of worthwhile. So this is effectively, so think of like Amazon EC2, except it's running in your house. That's effectively what we've got here. So you don't have to worry about spinning things up out in public space and people can have remote access to it. You don't have to worry about running VMs on your local system. This is a system you can go through and you can dedicate to the whole thing, which is kind of cool. It's based on KVM. It's not based on Docker. So there's a little bit of conversion you might do if you have like, not Docker. Docker is one of the things that it's not directly compatible with. There's some conversions you need to do, but we'll get into that. There are ways to import ISOs if you have them. There's ways to import like VMware images if you have those. I'll get into that one a little bit later. And the management interface on this is just super easy to go through and use. So like I said, there's a lot of reasons why this just works out for me to be an awesome solution. There's a lot of times that I just want to, anytime you have something that can be internet accessible, you need to go in and you need to make sure it's locked down, right? But if it's running on your home network behind your firewall, you can be a little bit more laxed and not necessarily have to worry about it. Sometimes you just want to spin a system up, beat on it a little bit, and then you'll kill it. Well, if that's exposed on the internet, that may be long enough for somebody to break in. But if it's on your home network, you can get away with it. So it's a little bit more flexible. Leaving a VM running does not eat into your lunch money. Yeah, in other words, if you're running an instance in public cloud and you forget about it, and come on, we all have. So yeah, like I said, just the fact that like there are times that I'll forget, I'll spin up a VM, do some testing, and then oops, I forgot it was there, and I go shut it down a month later, and now it's cost me money for something that I didn't really need to. So yeah, again, if this is private, it's running within your own environment. So many features, so little time. Yeah. So I mentioned this is focused towards enterprise. So you have the ability to do things like high availability clustering, live migration. You can have a live VM running and migrate it between different pieces of hardware, role-based authentication. You can sync this with LDAP. I mean, again, these might be fun things to kind of play with in a home lab, but there's certainly things that are a requirement once you get into enterprise. I'm not about doing one on the software-defined networking and the firewalling, just because stuff I've already found a couple of times I've gone in and set up a VM that's a firewall and then a VM inside it and outside it and had some testing I wanted to go through and play around with. It'd be kind of useful. So if a webcast that's just on how to do networking with Proxmox is interesting to folks, go ahead and throw that in a chat. If I see enough people, I'll go through and generate. It doesn't take a lot to get an instance going here. It really doesn't. So like yeah, let me show you that because this is like a bare bone system, but it works awesome. So it's this little bugger here. It's, click the little coupon thing, you get $35 off. So it's about $530 US for this thing. But it's got a real i7 chipset in it. You got 8 threads. You got 32 gigs of RAM. I commonly have at least 5 to 7, I'd say, VMs running at the same time. And this box just knocks it out of the park for that, for a little over $500. So you can definitely, upsize that if you want to. You can go through and, come up with like 200, 200 cores or whatever you want to spend money on. But, this is something nice. It's small and it runs on my rack, as part of my home server setup. Does really well. So the only problem I've had is make sure it's well vented. In other words, if you do what I did initially, which is stack other mini computers on top of it, it doesn't get enough ventilation, it will overheat and it will shut itself down. But that problem goes away. That's pretty easy to deal with. Installation is super easy. So the link on the bottom brings you to the installer. It's less than 2 gigs. So you can go down and download that image and then just make a bootable USB drive for it. If you don't have software to do that, here's my recommendation. It runs on a bunch of different platforms. It's super easy to go through and use. You start it up. It says, oh, okay, I found this USB drive plugged in. Is this where you want to put your stuff? And point me to the ISO you want, and it'll just automatically go through and make a bootable USB drive for you. When you boot up for the first time, right? So plug system up for the first time, it's probably going to want to try and start up off of the hard drive. So if you've got an AMD BIOS, which that little mini PC I was showing you does, just hit the delete key. If you've got something else, it might be F3, F5, sometimes they're a little help you out there, but you're going to want to go into the config, change the boot order and tell it you want to boot up off of the USB drive first. Once you do that, Proxmox installation will start up, and the installation is really simple. You basically go through and tell it, here's your IP address, your subnet mask, here's where, the default gateway is, here's the password I want to use for the root level account, and you're off to the races. It'll go through and do everything else for you at that point there. This is not a entire home network in one type of solution. We got a couple of folks that are doing system recommendations. That is awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is not an all-in-one solution for home network type of thing, right? There's no DNS or DHCP built into it. It is a Debian Linux system. So you probably could install stuff onto it if you wanted to. My personal recommendation, though, would be to run those services as a VM. Spin up a VM and install Pi-hole on it. Pi-hole will give you DNS and DHCP and all that other fun stuff. It's simple, easy to use. And there's a way to set up Proxmox so that if the Proxmox server itself gets rebooted, it'll auto start certain VMs for you that you go through and you indicate that this needs to start up anytime Proxmox gets rebooted. I'll show you those features as we go through them. Once that's done, open up your browser, HTTPS to whatever IP address you assign to this thing. It listens on port 8006. You're going to get a login screen. The login is always root. The password is going to be whatever you define during the setup. So don't forget what you assigned. And boom, you're off to the races from there. Just go ahead and hit login. You will get this screen here, no valid subscription. This is the nag because you're using it for free. So what they're basically saying is, hey, you don't have a subscription to get the enterprise patches for this thing. So, you may want to go in and you may want to do something about that. It's not dirt cheap. It's $680 per CPU per year. So that's not dirt cheap, but this to me is a good project that's worth going in and paying for. So, but that's personal call. So rather than just keep doing slideware, let me go in and start showing you what this thing looks like, because wow, it's a lot of fun. So here's my main screen. So this is, if you notice at the top here on the left, I have data center. So if I have multiple systems running that are running Proxmox, they'll be listed underneath this particular data center for everything. This gives me summary information, how many of my Proxmox systems are online and offline. You can see I only have one. How many virtual machines are running total, how many stops. So you get some good summary information. If I click on that system, which I, gave it the unique name VM because I'm not that creative sometimes, I can get same type of similar information, summary on the whole thing. Now, see these little green triangles here? That tells me which VMs are actually running right now. So I've got 4 VMs running. I'm using about 14% of my CPU, and that's it. And I'm using about a third of my RAM, somewhere in that range there. So as you can see, that $500 box does a pretty good job on these things. So, kind of cool. So down here, this is where we start getting into our image storage, right? So I've got ISO images here. So if let's say, I want to start deploying VMs on this, I need to have ISO images loaded locally in order to build those VMs off of. There's another option I'll talk about in a little bit, but to start, I need the ISO images. I can upload them from my local system, so I could download the image and then upload it here. But this has a really neat feature to it that I love called download from URL. Now, this will be off by default. So let me come back to that in just a second. So what does that do? Well, what that does is if I know what the URL is, rather than having to download it to my local system, I can just give it that URL. Let's say I want to download Kali Linux. I can go in and I can do that. And now when I query the URL, that'll verify that the URL is working properly. And I should see the file name of the ISO pop up here. If I do, I know I'm in good shape. Now, this is where it gets really cool. If I turn on advanced options, one of my advanced options is I can go in and I can say, hey, I want to validate the hash on this download. So I can go in. So if the website where I'm downloading the ISO from posts a hash image, I can just copy that, paste that in here. And now I can go through and I can download it. And when the download completes, it'll actually check that hash to make sure that the integrity verification on this image is okay. So I don't have to worry about, hey, now I go to try and use the image and things aren't working for some reason. This fixes all of that, which is kind of cool. So I can, once I have ISOs, I can now create VMs from those. Now, if I want to run containers, I need to have templates for those as well. It doesn't use Docker. It uses the built-in Linux stuff. It uses KVM. So I'll get in and talk about that one a little bit more because there's ways to kind of go in and do conversions and stuff like that if you need to. But I've got the same 2 options I had before, upload from my local system or download from a URL. But I also have this one here, templates. And this is kind of similar to like Docker images. If I go in and do a Docker image search, I can see what type of images are available. This is the same type of thing. There's not as many of them as you get with Docker. But that doesn't mean that you can't go through and create your own anytime that you need to as well, which is kind of cool. So I can go in and I could just pull down a template and now that's available. What's kind of cool is that Proxmox runs the container directly. In other words, I don't have to spin up a VM and then run the container inside of the VM. Proxmox takes care of all of that in the background invisibly to me. So to me, it looks like I'm just launching the container natively and it's just going in and it's running, which is kind of cool. It's a great way to be able to go in and kind of get this stuff up and running. Okay, so let's say, so I've downloaded templates for my ISOs and I've downloaded templates for my containers. Now I want to go through and I want to start spinning up a system, right? Let's say I want to go in and create my system for the first time. I've got 2 ways I can go about doing that. I've got little buttons over here on the right. So I can say I want to create a VM or I want to create a container, or I can just right click on my data center and pick create a VM, create a container from there if I want to. Notice I can also do bulk start, stop, suspends if I need to. I can get to the shell on the actual Proxmox system itself. But let's say I want to create a virtual machine because that's what most of us are probably going to end up doing. I'm going to run through each of these prompts along the top. as we go through this. So the first thing I have to say is, which Proxmox system do I want to put this on? Now, I only have this one that's named VM. Notice it's showing me, hey, what's the utilization on that right now? That's kind of cool, because if I have multiple hardware platforms I'm running Proxmox on, I can pick the one with maybe the lowest load or that type of thing. The VM ID, if I don't touch this, it will automatically assign the next available VM ID. I can change this to something else if I want. I forget how high these numbers go up. It's like 10,000 or 100,000 or something. It's much larger than you would ever have for VMs running at the same time. So you can go really big with this if you need to. And then I can go in and I can give this a system name. I'm going to just call this test. And remember I said that you could get things to start up and shut down along with Proxmox, or you could get VMs to start up and shut down along with starting and stopping the Proxmox system so they automatically reboot. Here's how I do that here. Now, these are advanced options, so normally you wouldn't see them. You got to click the little advanced to get to them. And I can say, hey, I want to be able to start this at boot and startup shutdown order. So startup shutdown order is a number. The lower the number, the higher the priority. So let's say this was going to be like my DNS system. So I'm going to give this a priority of 1. But I have a test server that I also want to have boot up. I might give that a priority of a 10 or 50 or some higher number. Well, the 1 is going to get started first. Well, what if I have 2 servers, one's running DNS, one's running DHCP, and I give them both a startup priority of 1? Well, the deciding factor is the VM ID. So whichever one of those 2 has the lower VM ID, that one will actually get started up first. Startup delay is the delay that will take place after this VM starts, not before. I know that might sound a little bit confusing. So if I say, hey, I want to start this VM up first, and I want a delay of 30 seconds. Well, once this VM starts up, it's going to pause for 30 seconds, and then it'll auto start the next VM after that. Shutdown timeout is just, hey, when the shutdown gets issued, how long do you want to wait before you decide that, hey, something's wrong with this system. It's not going to shut down clearly. We just need to kill it. And you can set that timer for whatever you want. The default is 3 minutes, which is probably a good setting. So you're probably not going to have to go in and tweak that. All right, so that's it for our general. So now we get into the OS. So we go in and we define, where is it? Well, it's going to be local storage if this is the only thing we have running. And then I need to go in and select one of my ISO images. So I could go in and I could say, okay, I want to run this off of an Ubuntu image. What kind of kernel is it? It's a Linux system. What's the kernel version? I can go through and select that. Pretty straightforward to go through and do. So, this one's not too hard. This is where it starts getting a little bit confusing for folks. So the machine defaults to I440FX. That is, so Proxmox by default is going to give you hardware to emulate that'll deal with most operating systems you're going to throw at it. And the way it does that is by defaulting to very old settings. So for example, this machine definition really is kind of like, I don't know, a 10-plus-year-old system, right? That's what it's going to want to default to. So if you think about like what options are available in the BIOS and that type of thing, and what options can a system count on, well, this is just going to define that, hey, it's 10-year-old hardware, so some of the more advanced stuff might not even be available. Q35, much better way to go here. So if we go in and set this for Q35, that's going to say it's more modern hardware. For the BIOS setting, I can go in and I can change this as well. CBIOS, again, is kind of old. I would go for OVMF. That's a more modern BIOS setup that I can go through and use. Now, if I select that, it's going to say, oh, hey, I need to store a little bit of code on disk. Where should I store it? Just store it in the local, and you'll be in good shape. SCSI, the default settings usually fine for that, so you don't have to worry about that one at all. You'll be in pretty good shape. Disk settings really isn't a whole lot to tweak here, besides maybe the default disk size. 32 gigs is a little bit small. There's a way to go in and kind of hack around with the config files to change what the default comes out to. You can do that. I'm been lazy. So I just leave it at 32 and upgrade it to 50 sometimes for some systems. You can always grow these VMs later if you need to. So 32 seems to be a good round number unless you're actually trying to deploy Windows systems. Now, this is where it can kind of get a little bit confusing for folks. And I'm actually going to shut off the advanced for a second, just so we don't get too crazy with what's on the screen at this point. So sockets and cores, basically think of these as, it's kind of weird speak, but think of these as threads, right? So whatever the multiplier is of these two, that's how many threads are going to be available for a system. So I'll usually give it 4. Is usually a good round number for like a test system. If you got a production box, you might want to allocate more. You can oversubscribe the number of threads that are available. So for example, that little mini PC I gave you has 8 threads available. I assign everything at 4. I can have 5 or 6 systems running at the same time. It'll just manage the threads based on whoever needs it. So you don't have to kind of keep track in your head how many threads have you used up or anything like that. You can oversubscribe and it'll work fine. So think of it as more of a minimum. Now, we're back to hardware of the system over here. x86 64. So that is, if I remember correctly, that's like a 15-year-old IBM PC compatible is what it's pulling up by default here. It doesn't have the AES built in. It has to emulate it. So what do you choose? There's a lot of different hardware options here. Here's a fun one. So if you're going to run like DOS 3.0, 3.3 or 4, you could say, oh, I'm running a Pentium chip, and you can go in and you can define it that way. There's a bunch of different options here for things you can choose. The one you're probably going to want to use most of the time for home labs is this last one, host. What host does is host says, hey, I'm a security guy. I'm not a hardware guy. So I don't know what options are available in my CPU or the BIOS or any of that crap. Proxmox, you figure that out for me, and it will. So when you set this for host, it says, okay, I'm going to analyze the host. I'm going to analyze what features are available, and I will pick the type based on the hardware that you're running. And this is the easiest way to go through and deal with this and tweak it for max performance. The only downside to this is if you start running multiple Proxmox systems and you want to migrate between them and the hardware is different, this is going to come back to bite you. If I go in and give it a strict definition, like x86 v4, that one's only like a 7 or 8 year old definition. If I go in and define like 7 or 8 year old hardware, and so long as all the hardware I use is newer than 7 or 8 years old, I can migrate my live images back and forth and everything should just work fine. But if I use host and there's differences between the two hardware platforms, like one's an Intel, one's an AMD chip or something like that, that's going to come back to bite me with live migration. So just be careful with that. So like I said, for most of us, we're going to want to go into host. Now, if you are a hardware person, you can actually turn on and off any of the features that are part of that chipset that are available to you. I never play with this. I'm not smart enough. You can choose to if you want to. Just keep around. It's real easy to go in and muck things up. It's actually easier than it is to try and do it right. So all the advice I'm giving you is kind of based on a bunch of different tuning I've done and playing around with this. I will say that I can I can go in and by tuning the type, I get better performance out of a VM with only like 3 or 4 threads than I do out of like an EC2 image or a DigitalOcean image that's probably going to run me about $30 to $50 a month. you can get some really good performance going in and tweaking it this way, which is really cool. All right. So memory. So memory, again, you can oversubscribe. So by default, what you're setting is what's the maximum amount of memory I want to allocate to the system. So in this case here, I'm saying 2 gigs is what it's defaulting to. It's looking what I have available for RAM and kind of making a decision based on that. But what if I want to allocate a minimum to it, right? Like I want to say, hey, this operating system is always going to need a minimum of 2 gigs, right? So I'm running, modern Linux kernel. I want to make sure there's at least 2 gigs available to it all the time. But you can allocate, let's say 12,000. So 12 gigs is what this thing can balloon up to. Just don't let it grow past that point there. So now the amount of memory available to this VM will be somewhere within this range. Notice it changed the minimum on me, so I have to go back and change that back to the minimum that I want. But, that's pretty minimal. Let's see, is there an advantage to 4 cores rather than 2 sockets, 2 cores? Yeah, I think I agree with Char. I think that's more of an issue on the Windows side versus the Linux side. The Linux side tends to look at how many threads do I have? I don't care if it's coming from 1 core or 5. How many threads do I have? And it just works with that. Good question. Then we get into the networking stuff. And this is another one where you probably don't have to play around with this too much. That VirtIO is really going to give you the best performance unless you're running Windows. If you're running a Windows virtual image, you got to stick with one of the Intel cards. It won't deal with the virtual. Doesn't like it. So, it is what it is. So if you're running Linux, BSD, something like that, go ahead and use the VirtIO that it defaults to. If you're running a Windows system, you're going to want to go back to one of the Intel cards. And you can play around with MTU and stuff like that if you really want to. I think for most of us, unless we're like trying to like mess with something specifically, you can ignore all this stuff down the bottom. Everything under the line is an advanced option. So when I shut this off, those options go away. Once I'm done, now this is all confirmed and ready to go. Cool. So I can go in and I can say, I want to finish that. And once it does, here we go. Here's my image 110. So now to get this VM up and running, all I got to do is click the Start Now button, and this will start booting up. By the way, if I hit delete, that'll get me into my CMOS BIOS, which is weird to me. It's a virtual image, but a virtual image that still has like an AMD BIOS built inside of it, which is awesome. But as you can see, this is all ready to go through and just start running through the regular Ubuntu install at this point. So I'm not going to take the time to kind of go through all those prompts, but you get the idea. I could go through and I could kind of run that through from here. Now I've got a little pop-out menu here that I can pull out. Let's say sometimes reading in this screen is tough. And it's starting itself up. I don't care. I'm just going to kill it when we're done anyway. But you can see the text is really small. It's hard to read. I can actually, from that little pull-out menu, I can make this full screen. So now it's a whole lot easier to actually see what's getting printed up on that screen. If I click it again, it'll go back to minimizing the whole thing. I can also go in and I can send special characters. If I need to send like the Windows key to it for some reason, I can go through and I can do that. Here's my setup options. I can also go through and I can power it up, power it down from here as well. So this little VNC pop-up menu is really useful. That allows me to go in and kind of, muck around with things while that they're running from there. So that's how I would get a VM up and running. Now, once I have a VM up and running, right? Once I have one all set up, I don't want to go through all these steps each time, right? I don't want to have to do this every time. So one of the things that it might be good to do is to go in and build an image that is going to be the image you want to clone from. And that's what I do. So what I do is I actually give it a special name. I give mine the name template because I know I'm going to turn it into a template to build images off of later. That way the name over here on the left-hand side is very obvious which one is my template. It's not a system I'm actually using. How do you make a template? All you do is you go in and you right-click on it, convert to template. Now, keep in mind this converts it to this image to a template. It does not make a copy and create a template off of that. So when I say convert this to template, that becomes a template. It's not there as an image anymore. Now, with that said, once I make it into an image, or excuse me, into a template, I can simply clone it and I get stuff back. So that'll work out pretty well for me. So this is the easiest way to go through and do it. So this is saying, Ubuntu. So this is my Ubuntu 24 LTS image. It's the minimum install. So it takes up the least amount of space. I don't like to install everything unless it's actually needed. So that saves me on disk space. Also, when I go in and let's say I want to clone this template, where do I want to create it? Here's my next virtual VM ID that's available. I give it some descriptive name here. And then now the descriptive name I give it here is the name that'll show up on this list. That doesn't change the host name. To change the host name, I need to do three things if I want to do it live without needing a reboot. I need to say sudo space host name, and then, so I need to start this VM up and then log in and say sudo space host name space, and then whatever the host name is that I want it to have. And then I need to edit the etc host name file and add the name there. And then I need to edit the etc host file and change the 127.0.0.1 entry to point at the new host name that I want to use instead. Once I do that, I'll have a new name. So this doesn't change it at the command prompt. This only changes how it's going to get listed over here. But I can go in and I can give it a descriptive name. And I have two options here. I can do a link clone or a full clone. A link clone is almost like, can you copy paste between all your VMs? So it really depends upon what you're using for a tool. A lot of times, if you've got a web interface for each, you can. So yeah, most SSH tools will let you do that. Hey, if you're like running Windows and you're just SSHing into multiple systems, you can copy paste between the Windows command line on each of those as well. But I've got two options: full clone, link clone. Full clone is just, hey, let's make a full copy of that virtual machine. A link clone is kind of like how Docker works, right? So with Docker, I'll create a container from an image, but the container is really only the things that get changed from the image. It still uses the image for most of the files it needs. The container kind of becomes a diff, if you will. That's what a link clone does as well. So a link clone says, all right, rather than copying the same binary code over and over again, we're just going to link to it off of this template, and I'm going to go at it from there. So on the plus side, it saves storage. On the downside, if you nuke the template that everything's based off of, you're going to lose a lot of the code and your VMs are going to die. So you got to be careful with that aspect of it. So you can create a link clone, a full clone, whatever it is you want to do. But once I say clone, boom, I've got a new image here that I can go in and kind of work with, which is kind of nice. So real easy to get in and kind of navigate around. Now, what if I have VMs already that I want to import into this system? I have a slide for that in here somewhere. Let me find it. It was after this stuff. Where is it? Here we go. Yeah, okay. Here's a couple things I wanted to cover. Yeah, here it is. So let's say I've got something I've been running under VMware and I want to pull this in. The first thing I need to do is export that as an OVF file. So if I'm using VirtualBox, VMware, doesn't matter. All I got to do is export that as an OVF file. And I need all the OVF files, or all the files that get created, not just the OVF file itself. But then what I'll do is I'll zip them all up, use a secure copy to transfer them over to the Proxmox system. And you can just store it. You can just copy it over to the home directory for the root user. And then once you're in there, uncompress that zip file, which you may need to install unzip to get that running. It's not on Proxmox by default. But then I just run this command here. So I say QM import OVF. I need a free VM ID. So I need to look at what's being used, what's available to be used. I need to make sure I use a free one. And then I identify the name of the OVF file and then where I want to store that information, which will be on the local storage. Once I do that, I'll see it start to running saying copying block X of Y. And it'll just sit there and copy blocks for a while. Once it's done, now when I go down here, that'll show up as one of my images that I can use. Once I have that image there, I can then go in, spin up a VM out of it. So this is how to pull stuff in that you might already have available to you. Let's see, we talked about the templates. There was one other oh yeah, I wanted to talk about this one. So here's one of the problems I ran into with Proxmox that drove me nuts at first. When you clone a VM, you clone the entire VM. It will change things like the hardware. So for example, if I go in and I look at, let's say, test 2, and I look at the hardware, here's the system's MAC address, 5A7F. When I go to the next one, so test 2 and test 3 were cloned off of the same template, but notice the MAC address is changing. If I'm using a DHCP system that uses the MAC address to identify when a system should get a unique IP address, this will all work fine. If, however, I'm using one of the modern DHCP systems, like the one built into Proxmox, that tries to be too friggin' smart for its own good, they've stopped using the MAC address and they're using the machine ID now. Well, here's the problem. When you clone it, that machine ID stays the same. So even though the MAC address is different now, it's going to try to assign it the same IP address it was using on the system that you cloned in the first place. So you're going to end up with IP address conflicts. And like I said, Pi-hole was where I first ran into this problem. Here's how to fix it. So what you need to do, you need to do this before you create your template. So build your VM up, right? Minimum Ubuntu install. Here's the deal. I want these tools to be there all the time. Here's all my patches. Do whatever it is you want to do with it. And then go in and run these 4 commands. What this is going to do is this is going to nuke the machine ID right before you go in and you create it, turn that VM into a template. And because there's no machine ID, the first time you boot that that system that you made, or that clone that you made, the first time you boot it, it's going to auto-generate a new random one. So that will fix this DHCP problem, but you need to do this to the VM before you turn that VM into a template. Let's see. Is there anything else on this I wanted to show you? Clone options, we talked about that. Resource monitoring, yeah, we went in, we kind of looked at that already. And yeah, that's about it. So yeah, so I wanted to keep this simple. So again, really basic. Download the Proxmox image, burn it onto a USB drive, make sure it's bootable, start up your hardware off of that. Proxmox pretty much takes care of everything as part of the install. You just got to create a password and give it an IP address, and that's it. And then once it's up and running, your next step is to pull down ISO images for any VMs you want, pull down templates for any containers that you want. Once you do that, you can now start creating virtual machines and containers based on these images. And that's it. Pretty straightforward. So I know we still got about 15 minutes left, but we also wanted to do kind of a little bit of an Ask Me Anything session. But before we get into that, hey, folks, are there any questions I may have missed in Discord? I was trying to keep up with it, but I thought I answered everything I saw go by.
Yeah, same here. A lot of it was self-healing, so to speak. There's a bunch of very cool people in there that are answering a lot of the questions. So
yes.
But if anybody does have anything outstanding, of course, speak up or type up.
What are some of the tips for allocating and using storage on the PVE instance and network storage? Yeah, so there are definitely options for that. You can have a separate system that is your storage system that you can link through to this. I honestly haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole with Proxmox yet. So I know the options are there. I haven't needed them, so I haven't had an opportunity to kind of play around with it yet. So if anybody has any advice along those lines, that would be awesome. Because for me, it was just, I'm not a hardware guy. I'm a security guy. So this was, what's the shortest path to get a test environment where I can beat stuff up on? And to do that was to just go ahead and use local storage. Now, if I was running, enterprise environment, we're running databases off of this. This is when, what you use and how you use it really starts to matter. And there's a ton of YouTube videos I've found on that type of thing. But as far as like getting something set up that you can just go through and start, doing some internal testing on, this is pretty straightforward. Any way to use Docker engine or KVM only? Oh, good question. So there is a way to convert. Let's see. I know I have that in here somewhere. IP conflicts. So I've got it in the slide deck somewhere. There's a way to go in and convert between Docker and excuse me, and the local containers. You can go back and forth if you need to, but my advice would be if it's Docker and you want to leave it as Docker, you'd probably want to just spin up a VM and run the Docker stuff inside of that. That would be the easiest way to go through and do that. I know I had a slide that goes through and talks about how to do the conversion. Yeah, this is VMs. I had the same thing on the Docker side. I don't know. I missed it somewhere. So yeah, so short answer, yes, you can convert Docker instances, but if you don't want to, your best bet's just to leave them in a VM. That way you're not trying to convert them back and forth all the time. Let's see what else we got. Yep, somebody's listing out a lot of the features of Proxmox. That's awesome. Can you change CPU emulation after the VM has booted? Yes. So it won't, I don't think it'll let you do it live. Let me find
I
out.
believe that's likely the case, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
You
can
have
go
to
in
shut
and
it down.
I can say, hey, I want to add some additional cores here. Yeah. And what it's telling me is this is what I'm currently using. This is what I'll get set to the next time I run. So you can't change it live, but I can change it while it's running. It just won't do anything yet. Good question, though. Can you change CPU? Yeah, and the emulation, yep, is the same thing. It'll just pick it up the next time you reboot it. You have to shut down and reboot. Yep, somebody threw that in there. That's awesome. Can you change memory, hard disk space live? Same thing. I can go in and I can change the settings, but it isn't going to actually take effect until I do a reboot. What's the next webinar? How to Proxmox our home network to monitor packets. So I did mention that I'm happy to do one on the Proxmox networking and some potential setups you might want to go with to go in and do some red teaming, maybe play around with some blue teaming tools. I'm happy to do another one on that. Although the next one that's actually scheduled is that Fireside series I was talking about at the beginning of the cast. I have a question. SSDs. Yeah. Okay. You don't need to sell a kidney for a good source. Okay. So looking for a place to find decent SSDs that are cheap. Open switch. Yeah, it's a cool tool. Can it send alerts to you via email? I do not believe so. Although you could certainly have this send logs to like a syslog server and then have that go through and generate your emails for you. More blue team, please. Yeah, I agree. It's harder. Before creating the template, you can do the steps to delete the machine ID, etc. Then you convert it to a template, and every time you clone, you have a different VM. Yes, and the machine ID is different for every single one of those VMs. Absolutely. I believe you can expand a disk live, adding in a new disk requirement to the VM on start. Yeah, it'll let's see. So if I go in, oh, I don't even have an option. Change the size of the disk here. So it's not even letting me change that while it's live. Interesting. So yeah, I'd have to shut down before I'd have to go in and change the disk size. Cool. Will the recording be available? Absolutely. It will be on our YouTube channel. Let's see, eBay. Sure. Well, while converting an OVF files, I get 2 separate VMDK files. Oh, yeah, I'm not sure what you're seeing with that, or what actually be kind of interested in what tool you're using, because typically you're going to get these 3 here. So I only see 1 VMDK file, not 2. If you have a spam port, you can use the links I posted to send all your packets to AC Hunter, Security Onion, or both. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the next thing I want to go through and do with Proxmox is give it a dedicated NIC. And how high up can I scale to go through and capture packets before I start seeing a lot of packet loss? That's something I haven't had a lot of luck with other infrastructure as a service platforms in the past. So I'm kind of curious to see how well Proxmox does with that. Usually the hypervisors top out at around 100 meg, somewhere in that range there, but we'll see. Excellent session. Thank you. This is being recorded. Yes. Is it hard to get a graphics card and do pass-through for password cracking on a Kali system in Proxmox? Good question. I have not tried that. I also haven't. So it would depend upon, I guess, what you have. So the pass-through shouldn't be hard. It really comes down to what do you have available on the system you have. That mini PC I kind of recommended at the beginning of all this. I doubt there's an extra slot in there for a network card. So I don't think that would be a possibility with that system. But with with like a normal, like a 1U pizza box server, yeah, you should be able to do that. Let's see. I think we got everything. Student in the early sessions, build my home lab. Thanks for the session today. Happy to. On the topic of storage, I'm using TrueNAS directly installed, but I'm thinking about installing Proxmox and using TrueNAS in a VM. Any advice is appreciated. So Lucas, it kind of depends upon what do you want to learn, right? You like the NAS stuff is great if that's your focus. With Proxmox, that's kind of giving the opportunity to run anything you want to. So if I have like one system and if I had to choose between the two, then yeah, my choice would be Proxmox. If you already have a NAS running and you have images on it, you could spin up another system, run Proxmox on that, and then just link it to the NAS for storage. You can definitely go through and do that with it. Would it be as fast? I think local storage tends to outperform network storage on average. So it kind of depends on what you have for a setup. And again, it kind of depends how far down the complexity road you really want to go. Let's see. I think we kind of caught everything. Cool. Shelby, do you still want to do a Ask Me Anything session?
We definitely can if anybody wants to hang around for one, if they have any questions about the upcoming firesides or AC Hunter or anything like that. But I know we have been spending the last few minutes answering questions in general. So
yeah. Fell down a rabbit hole setting up for a span feed for security on it. Yeah, I did that this morning, dude. I like, the entire team was meeting. My reminder went off and said, you have 10 minutes. And I said, oh, well, with 10 minutes, I can go do this stuff over here. And Bill gently nudged me like 10, 15 minutes into the meeting, like, dude, where are you? That's like, oh, crap.
Never happens to anybody else, of course.
Oh,
No.
yeah, I definitely fall down rabbit holes. I definitely fall down rabbit holes.
So if we're doing a Ask Chris Anything, Just go to the breakout room menu at the bottom of Zoom, right, Shelby?
Wow. And I see Eric and Root Beer are like trading over who worked with the oldest version of NetWare. Eric is 2.0. Root Beer was 3.12. I was in the middle. I was 3.11 was the first version of NetWare I ever ran. Has the new AC Hunter Community Edition dropped yet? No, it has not. It will drop at the beginning of January. So we've done a lot with the new version of AC Hunter. It completely changes the workflow. We're going to do a webcast on that in about 3 weeks. So that'll be our December webcast is, hey, this is what AC Hunter 7 looks like. We're going to be releasing the enterprise version at the same time that we release the next community edition. So you'll have both of those as an option. But I'm going to go through and talk about what we've changed and why in December. And then we're going to release it in January. And we're going to release it in January because Bill monitors support. And no matter how many times I insist to him he needs to take time off, he doesn't. And even when so we shut down for 2 weeks over Christmas time just to give everybody time to walk away and get their heads back. And I try and get Bill to do that, and he won't. So if you're sad that AC Hunter 7 isn't coming out until January instead of December, it's Bill's fault because I got to make sure he actually takes a vacation.
I'll take responsibility for that one.
Oh, let's see. Thanks for the webcast. Happy to. Oh, help a script. That's cool. Saw the new interface at Wild West Hackfest. It looked amazing. Yeah. So I think one of the challenges with the new interface is it can initially feel like it has less functionality. Because like the current version of AC Hunter, there's an IP-based screen, IP-based beacon screen. There's a what do we call it? Web beacon screen. There's a long connection screen. There's a DNS screen. There's this screen. There's that screen, and we just consolidated it all down to a single interface and got it all working. So it actually and the screens aren't as busy, but there's actually more information there to work with. One of the things I wanted to go after was, hey, when I use AC Hunter and I find something interesting, I need to go to the Zeek logs to figure this out, right? So there was info that AC Hunter wasn't giving me. I want that in the AC Hunter interface, and we've added stuff like that in. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is going to be, really, there's more functionality here than there used to be. Is it easy to do an upgrade, or will we have to just start over? So you're going to have to start over. Now, with that said, AC Hunter is open licensing. You can run 50 copies and we don't care. So to have them both running side by side, there's no additional cost on the license side. It does mean, an additional VM to run the new version along with the old version. But yeah, we changed the database, we changed the user interface, we changed the middleware, we changed so many things that trying to maintain backwards compatibility is hard. So here's what you do. Let's say you're about to convert from 6 to 7 and you want to keep like the last 2 weeks, get the Zeek logs and just import them in and you'll have it. So you won't be able to do an in-place upgrade, but if you need to work with any of your existing data or any of your old data in the new version, just go ahead and import it in and you'll be fine. I spun up NetWare 2 so that I could upgrade it to 4.11. Oh, wow. Yeah, that was NetWare was one of my first public vulnerability disclosures. I did a vulnerability. So NetWare, when you first connected, unauthenticated, you had access to the system directory. And if you went into the system directory, you could, there was a script that was used to boot the system, and hidden in there was the rconsole command that would give you console access to that system. So I went through and kind of did an advisory like, hey, maybe unauthenticated users shouldn't have access to the console password on the server. And NetWare came back and they started hashing it. So what got stored in the file was a hash, but it was like MD4 or something like that. It was something that was trivial to go through and kind of brute force. So yeah, NetWare was fun.
All right, we have hit the top of the hour. So we're going to go ahead and end the recording now on Zoom. Last reminders, yes, this was being recorded. If you missed any pieces, you can watch it on YouTube. We are also going to be certificates of attendance to anyone who attended through Zoom. So you should be seeing an email with those within 24 hours after this webcast has ended. If you want to keep chatting with us for a little bit longer, we're going to head to the breakout room that Ryan has so thoughtfully created for us. And we can chat there for a little extra time if anyone's interested.
Cool by me.